F. Scott Fitzgerald wrote that life starts all over again when it gets crisp in the fall. I say it starts when we get to Keeneland. Salutations and welcome, friends. I am your host, Matthew Desantis, to another episode of Countdown to Keeneland, which is going to get you ready for the Breeders' Cup. And we have a jam-packed episode. And listen, I had to start with a little literary license at the beginning. F. Scott Fitzgerald, one of my favorite authors, The Great Gatsby, one of my favorite books, always makes me think of that book around this time of year when it gets crisp in the fall. I'm here in the Mid-Atlantic, Northern Virginia. Definitely has been getting crisp, but first, let me send all my thoughts and prayers to all my friends, family, all of you who might be listening, who've been affected by Hurricane Ian over the last week or so, from down in Florida to the Carolinas. I know, those of us in Northern Virginia just got a lot of rain, but I know a lot of people were affected by it, and certainly hoping all of you are doing okay. And, if you had to relocate temporarily, I hope your house is all right. And also hope that this show, all of the stuff that we're doing on Trust the Prophets, takes your mind off some of the serious things that are going on right now. So going to have some fun today. And like I said, it's a jam-packed episode. Make sure to like and subscribe to the Trust the Prophets YouTube page. And make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle Failed to Menace, which is, of course, my favorite horse racing note. Now, like I said, we are packed with information today. Why? Because this is the Breeders' Cup winning urine races are a little bit like me when I was in college. It's a lot of pacing yourself slowly, and then the last week or two before the final, you study like hell to get to get your grades up. And it is kind of the same way, where last week we had 9 win and you're in races. This weekend we have 11 win and you're in races. We're not even going to be able to get to all of them today, but I am going to cover all of those that are taking place on Friday and Saturday, which is substantial in and of itself. So there's going to be a ton. This is really the last big weekend of win and you're in races for the Breeders' Cup. After this weekend, there's only 2 more, actually, both taking place over at Ascot. One of those is going to be a huge race between Adiyar and Baid. We'll talk about that next week on the show. But this week, it's all about Keeneland kicking off, Santa Anita having a few win and you're ins. And so a lot of really exciting stuff. But before we get to that, we're going to, of course, recap what took place last weekend. Then we're going to preview the races for this coming weekend, and then finally finish up with some horse racing news, of which there is a lot. All right, well, let's get going, and let's dive right into the big race last weekend, which was, of course, the Arc. And, I know I woke up early to watch it, although I wasn't that early on the East Coast, but I still woke up, a little bit earlier maybe than normal to watch the super mare, if you will, Alpinista, getting the win in the Arc. Just a truly remarkable effort. She's a mare that we talked about last week. I mentioned this was going to be her test against the boys. She had won 7 consecutive races going into this. Well, now you can make it 8 straight races, 6 consecutive Group 1 races as well. Very impressive effort, sitting not too far off the pace of title holder, who set a very, very brisk pace, and it got Sir Mark Prescott his first Arc victory as trainer. A great moment there, very understated moment. I always have a very special place in my heart for people like Mark Prescott and John Gosden, who are very underrated trainers and understated trainers in overseas, I should say. And, they don't, there's not a lot of hoopla. There's not a lot of jumping up and down. There's just kind of a pat on the back and a tip of the cap. And I like the way they go about their business quite a bit. But Alpinista, what an effort. Just an incredible performance. And going up against the boys, very soggy ground. If you watched, that it was just raining for days over there in Paris and at Longchamp, and it was just incredibly soggy ground. If this was in the United States, there's no way we probably would have run on that turf. But like I said, very, very soggy going. It actually ended up costing Luxembourg. You see that I crossed his name out. Luxembourg finished further back in this race. Actually had pulled a muscle as a result of how soggy the conditions were. So Aiden O'Brien has put him on the shelf. He is not going to be coming over. We'll get to some of the other fallouts from this race and the other races from the ARC in terms of who's coming over, who's not at the end of the episode. But just a tremendous effort from Alpinista. And you can see this Longine turf field is just about complete in terms of those win and your ins. You do see a few lines through different horses, State of Rest, Pile Driver, Luxembourg, all not coming over for one reason or another. But still the horses that remain are going to be very strong. And obviously several other horses are going to draw into this field based upon points. But let's also focus on the big race that took place here in the United States, which was the Awesome Again Stakes. And this is the qualifier for the Longine Classic. And this was won by the other Bob, right? So on the East Coast, we always talk about the other Chad horse, right? So Chad Brown typically has 3 or 4 turf horses in a race, and there's a favorite. And then, of course, it's when the 10-1 Chad Brown horse wins that we go, oh, it's the other Chad. That's the one you should have been betting on. Well, the other Bob Baffert horse, Defunded, finally came through and won. And this is a horse that I think a lot of people, self-included, have thought was going to break through before this race. And I kind of hand-waved this horse last episode because I thought this horse had been given every opportunity to show his stuff and just hadn't broken through. And I just kind of thought, okay, this is just kind of who this horse is. He's going to run underneath, and didn't really give it much thought other than that, but got out there to the lead, never relinquished it. Just a really great effort. I have to say, probably a little bit of a disappointing effort from Country Grammar, who came on for second at the end, but really this was a race set up for Country Grammar to win. The fact Country Grammar finished second, I think, was a little disappointing for Baffert, but now Defunded automatically qualifies for the Longine Classic. And so Baffert's going to have a number of runners in that race. We'll absolutely have Defunded. We'll have Country Grammar in all likelihood, and we'll also have Taba. So Bob Baffert's going to send 3 horses, and I like it. I mean, say what you will about Bob Baffert, but I appreciate anyone who's going to go up against Flightline and send their best horses against Flightline. So getting a fuller field for this race, I think, is something some of us were worried about. How would this Longine Classic fill out now that all of those win and your ends have been completed? Flightline, of course, is the early 3-5 favorite. Just truly stunning. It's hard to remember the last time this far out from the race that there was a 3-5 favorite in the Breeders' Cup Classic. Obviously, Flightline's performance on the track has justified that, but going to be something else to see. But like I said, great effort from Defunded. I'll also give a shout out. Really nice effort from Slowdown Andy, the Doug O'Neill horse. This is a horse I remember early on in his 3-year-old year, just running all the hell over the place at Los Alamitos. If anybody remembers that stretch run, I think it was maybe in the Los Alamitos Futurity. I mean, that horse was all over the place, looking at the grandstands, running in the middle of the track, was just super immature and green. And you could just tell there was talent, but just couldn't figure it out. But turned in a really strong, very close 3rd place effort in the Awesome Again. And you just saw that horse really mature a lot. So I'm excited to see what Slowdown Andy is going to bring next year. That feels like an ascending, classic division dirt horse out on the West Coast to keep your eye on moving forward. So the other track that hosted a win and you're in last weekend was, of course, Churchill Downs with the ACAC, and our good buddy Senor Buscador gets the win. I mentioned Senor Buscador on the show last week as a horse that you might want to consider using, and son of a gun, if Senor Buscador did not just make this really sweeping move around the far turn and got his head in front of Injunction and just kind of slowly grinded and pulled away. And Injunction had every opportunity to, I think, make a run at Senor Buscador down the stretch. But as I mentioned on last week's episode, Injunction feels like a horse you just want to use underneath, not a horse that wins a lot or doesn't win enough. And Senior Buscador, I just really, really like that horse. And I like the name too, of course. But Todd Fincher gets that automatic qualification for the Big Ass Fans Dirt Mile. That race is shaping up to be very interesting as well. Obviously, you see the automatic qualifiers. Flightline's going to be going to the classic Laurel River, more of a traditional sprint horse, but I could see him going to the Dirt Mile if he wants to. But obviously, we're going to have some talk about what horses are going to skip the classic to go to the Dirt Mile instead. So there's going to be a lot of jockeying for position there in the coming weeks. The other thing I'll mention about this race for the Big Ass Fans Dirt Mile is that Speaker's Corner is cooked. That horse is done. It's unfortunate to see, but I warned you that horse looked like he kind of had his heart broken by Life is Good in Flightline. And, it just has not been the same since those two races, and just did not look good in the ACAC. Well, let's talk a little bit more about some of those other races that took place over at Longchamp over last weekend, and one of those was the La Opera, and this was won by Place du Carrousel, the Andre Fabre horse, and this was a really good race. And what's interesting is I think the biggest name in this field was probably the horse Tuesday, who has run against the boys before and run at Ascot. And I think Americans and most people who follow horse racing probably have some name recognition with the horse Tuesday. Didn't really run that well, but Place de Carrousel ran beautifully, tremendous leg kick, really found the wire and just did a really, really nice, just a very, very impressive effort. What's interesting about this horse was coming off a 10th place finish in a Group 1 last time out. That said, did finish second in a Group 1-2 back and won a Group 3 back in April. So a horse that was certainly ascending, but a little bit of a surprise, and was a very big price on the board at 41-1. So a little bit of an upset victory there in the filly and mare turf. Let's go to one of my favorite efforts from this past weekend, and that is the victory of the Platinum Queen and in the La Abaya. Why was this my favorite? I'll tell you, it's because she's 2 years old. She's a juvenile, and she's a juvenile filly, and she's running against open competition. This is a race that is not for juvenile fillies. This is a race for older horses. This is a race for males. This is a race for females. This is a race for everybody. And a 2-year-old filly, the Platinum Queen, comes out on top for trainer Richard Fahey. Just an amazing effort. Now, here's the screwed up part of the Breeders' Cup. The Platinum Queen wins the turf sprint, okay, or wins the La Abaya and qualifies automatically for the turf sprint. But does she? She does not, it turns out. Why does she not qualify for the turf sprint? Well, because she's 2. And a 2-year-old cannot run in a Breeders' Cup turf sprint race. Because if you're a 2-year-old, you have to run in the juvenile races for the Breeders' Cup. So she is likely going to go to the juvenile turf sprint. But, this is something that I know there were a lot of people on social media talking about this after the race. This effort was a prime example of why, in my opinion, European turf racing is light years ahead of where American turf racing is and American racing is in general. And it's because they're not afraid to run outside of division. They run their horses against all different types of company, different types of ages. The girls run against the boys. The youngers run against olders. They're not so steadfast in sticking to, 2-year-old fillies have to run in this race, and 3-year-old males, and 3-year-old colts have to run in this race. And 3 years olds and up have to run in these races. It's much more open. I think it allows for these horses to get so much more seasoning. Yes, of course, the pedigree of these European turf horses is impeccable, with the Galileo lines and the Franco lines and all of that. And there's so much great pedigree over there. That said, it's still the way that they are trained, the regularity of racing, the fact they race on a lot of different surfaces in terms of the conditions of the surface, from firm to really soft and yielding. They just get these horses so much better prepared. And the reality that we'll get to later in this episode is the horses that come over for the Breeders' Cup are in a lot of cases the second level horses. It's not even the best horses from Europe that are coming over and beating us. It's the second best. It's the second tier of horses that are coming over and beating us. And so that just speaks to how impressive the operations are over there. And like I said, congrats to the Platinum Queen. I feel bad that she can't show her stuff and runs the adults in the first sprint, but inevitably will not be able to. But hope to see her obviously at the juvenile turf sprint. So the Fanduel Juvenile, this was the first automatic qualifier in this division, the Champagne. Always a big race. A lot of great winners. We talked about that last week. Jack Christopher, Jackie's Warrior, Firenze Fire. This year, Blazing Sevens, the Chad Brown horse. Two things, Blazing Sevens ran a perfectly good race. The conditions in this race were miserable because of the remnants of the hurricane. And so it's just sloppy and sealed. And it's always hard to get a true sense of how effective horses are when they're running on those conditions rather than on a fast, dry track. That said, some horses are just going to take to it better than others. Blazing Sevens ran a hell of a race, though. Came from off the pace on the inside and ran really well. Two things that came out of that race. One is, as I warned you, Gulfport is just burning money. That horse takes on a ton of money at the windows and just finishes second all of the time. The other thing I took out of this race is Andiamo a Firenze, who I really liked. I mentioned I think that would be the upper limits of his distance, and I think it was too much. It was just, he gave it a good effort on the front end. I think ultimately he's going to be like his dad, his brother, his three-quarters brother, Firenze Fire. It's just going to be a sprint horse. And I think it's going to be a really, really, really good sprint horse. But I think he's just clearly a classic sprinter, 6-7 furlongs. I think that's going to hit him right between the eyes as he gets older. But congrats to Blazing Sevens for being the first of the juvenile qualifiers for the Fanduel Juvenile. And of course, then we head over to the next Jets, Juvenile Phillies, and the Frisette, and that was won by Chocolate Gelato, the heavy odds-on favorite, won by Todd Pletcher, the trainer. And this was one where, Chocolate Gelato, I thought, made a really nice move around the far turn, splitting a couple of horses, handled the conditions extremely well, came from off the pace. That always impresses me when horses can come from off the pace in sloppy conditions. It doesn't mean that they're going to be able to do it when it's fast and dry, as I mentioned earlier, but being able to take that type of kickback for a young horse really, I think, shows a lot. And like I said, I thought that was very impressive. Didn't pull away down the stretch the way I thought she was going to. But again, can I chalk that up to some of the conditions? Maybe so. But Chocolate Gelato, winner of the Frisette, automatic qualifier for the NetJets Juvenile Phillies. And we got a couple of other qualifying races coming up this weekend in the Darley Alcibiades and the Chandelier Stakes. Then the Juvenile Turf Sprint. This was actually the final. There were only two qualifiers for this division, and they both ran last weekend. And that was, or I should say one of them ran last weekend, and that was Speedboat Beach, which is the Bob Baffert horse. Yes, Bob Baffert trains on turf as well. It's uncommon. He doesn't do it often, but does do it occasionally. Nice competitive race. Speedboat Beach got really nice stalking position. Only second career race. Actually cut back a little bit. Was going from 5.5 furlongs to 5 furlongs. Was the heavy favorite. Went off at 2-5. And won impressively. It's hard to say. Did he win the way a 2-5 shot should? Maybe not, but he won with ease, I think, in a lot of ways. Sat from just off the pace and made a move past Halitic and it did well, I thought, in that regard. You see Blackbeard, who's just a monster for Aidan O'Brien over in England, had won a qualifier in this division earlier this year. Blackbeard's a really, really, really good horse. I don't know if we're going to be able to see him or not, but he's going to be a really good horse to follow in the coming years. For the Juvenile Phillies Turf, this is one where I made you a little bit of money if you paid attention to me last week, because I gave you Pleasant Passage, who went off at 9-1. This was my top pick in the Miss Griot, and Shug McGahee for the win. I told you I had a feeling that Shug was trying to sneak this one by everyone. Pleasant Passage just had a perfect trip. There was zero pace in that race, and instead of screwing around, Pleasant Passage was sent straight to the lead, controlled the pace the whole way around, and had more than enough left to hold everybody off coming for home. It was a great effort and just a really wonderful race. And for a filly that I just felt was constantly improving, I just felt she was ready for a big jump in improvement in speed figures and just overall speed in general. And so impressed with Pleasant Passage. So she qualifies for the Juvenile Phillies turf. This is coming up like a pretty damn strong field with Taraya, Last Call, commissioning now. And then Blue Rose Sen in the Marcel Boussac. This was maybe the most impressive effort of the weekend. Was behind the pace, was kind of sitting fourth or fifth most of the way. And then the jockey just made a subtle move to move this horse over to the rail, moved kind of over a position, and I mean, see you later. It was lights out after that. I mean, made a move and then boom, they hit the accelerator. That horse has a button and pushed the button, and that horse just pulled away and won by about 6 lengths over the rest of the field, but was just so patient. And then just like I said, moved to the rail, had a clear opening, and then just pushed the button and see you later. That was a really, really impressive effort from Christopher Head's filly, Blue Rose Sen. In the juvenile turf, this was one where, again, we had 2 qualifiers from this past weekend, one in New York, one over in Paris. And what we saw was Todd Pletcher's horse, Major Dude, who's a horse I mentioned the other day. This is a horse that, it was a Bolt Doro, and I was a little skeptical. Bolt Doro on turf, there's not been a lot of proof yet of how effective Bolt Doro is as a sire on turf. But you know what he did was this horse got great position again. It was a little bit like Pleasant Passage. This horse just went out there and used its natural speed to get in a really nice position, sat third, made a move, and was able to pass the kind of front runners who set a really nice, strong pace up front for 2-year-olds. Instead of a 25 and 50, I think it was more of a 24-49. But for 2-year-olds, that's not bad. And especially under those conditions on the I think it was considered soft turf, might have been yielding, in fact, but that was pretty soft turf, obviously, because of the rain in New York. But like I said, Bolt Doro, very, very good. I'm Very Busy, the cloud computing horse that is in Chad Brown's barn, came running late. That horse, it's interesting. I want to see that horse run again. I'm Very Busy. That horse might have a little bit of hang in him. And I say that because that horse looked like he was coming like a freight train and then just kind of leveled out once he saw Major Dude and felt like he wanted to run with Major Dude and not past Major Dude. That's something, especially in turf racing, you always have to watch out for. But I thought Major Dude used that natural speed very well. I think that's a lesson to pay attention to this weekend at Keeneland, because we're going to see a bunch of really big fields for 2-year-olds. I would very much so look at who has good tactical speed to get out and get out of trouble so that they're not having to weave through the entire field coming for home. And then finally, the other horse that qualified in the Jean-Jacques Lugard was Belbeck. Made a nice move kind of in the middle of the track and found the wire. This was one just barely nosed out the competition and looked like a few others were actually going to make a run, but ultimately Belbeck was the one who was able to do it. This is a horse that really nice horse that's been running against monsters. This horse has been running against the Antarctic and Blackbeard leading up to this. Those are just 2 absolutely amazing horses. I mentioned Blackbeard earlier, but the Antarctic is a tremendous horse as well. So Belbeck has been keeping very, very good company. So you get those 2 out of his way. He showed what he can do. Really good grinding victory. He had a Group 3 victory already back in June. So builds on his really strong resume running against some of the best. All right, well, we tried to get through that as quickly as possible, and now I want to shift to previewing all of the huge races that we have this coming weekend. We're not going to touch on every single one of these horses, but listen, if you want to get more in-depth handicapping for Keeneland this weekend, you got to check out, we got a lot of different programs on the Trust the Profits. Most notably, tomorrow, I will be doing a Capping the Card, where we cap the entire Saturday card at Keeneland with none other than Stable Duel's Bree Mott. Bree's always a really, she's a good friend. She's a great personality. She's a really good handicapper, and look forward to talking about Saturday at Keeneland with Bree tomorrow and capping the card. So we're going to run through every race at the card on Keeneland on Saturday on that show. Here, we're just going to hit on those Breeders' Cup win and you're in qualifiers. And so we'll start with the Ogden Phoenix, 6 furlongs on the dirt. This is a qualifier for the sprint, obviously. Special Reserve is the favorite in this field. This is a horse that ran well, coming back from a similar layoff last year to win, coming off a little bit of a layoff again this year. So has shown it could do it. That said, the speed figures aren't quite up to what they were before, what they were looking like last year. So maybe not quite, not maybe as cranked up as I would hope. Will finally get good conditions. It's important to point out the last 2 times Special Reserve ran on a sealed track in sloppy and muddy conditions. So we'll be getting fast, dry conditions at Keeneland on Saturday, or on Friday, actually. That's when the Ogden Phoenix is. So we'll be getting those good conditions. And maybe you'll see better speed figures pop out of that, better overall speed effort bump coming out of that. Have to, of course, give a shout out to Sir Alfred James, who is making, get this, his 16th start of the year. He actually won 2 of his last 3. But I don't think that Friday is going to be the day for Sir Alfred James. Some other horses I'll just mention. Sibelius and Necker Island are 2 horses I really like a lot here for Jeremiah O'Dwyer and Chris Hartman, respectively. They both are doing the same thing, which is they both have cut back from a mile to 6 furlongs, and they both have thrived with that cutback. Now, they both are stepping up into graded stakes competition at this distance for the first time, so this is going to be a test for them, but I really like the 2 of them quite a bit. Sibelius, you're not getting a ton of odds. You're getting, I think, 5-2 on Sibelius, 7-2 on Necker Island, but a little bit better odds than Special Reserve at 2-1. The long shot I would give you here is Top Gunner, the John Ortiz horse. I really like John Ortiz as a trainer. I love Raylu Gutierrez as a jockey, but Top Gunner is a horse that has been running strong speed figures, has been running well, is definitely stepping up in class. I understand why he's 10-1 on the morning line, but I think this is a horse that has a real shot to run underneath in this particular race. Add some value to your tickets. Think about using Top Gunner in this particular race. So let's move to the Jessamine Stakes. This is a 1.16 on turf, and this is a qualification race for the Juvenile Phillies turf. The favorite is Towhead. Or Towhead, I guess. And Towhead, the Mike Maker horse, has drawn the far outside post position 12. Yikes. This horse is still a maiden, actually. Won a race that was a no contest and has finished second twice in 4 efforts. Has drawn the far outside post. I would actually bet against this horse. As much as I like Tyler Gaffleone, and I like Tyler a lot, turf racing in Kentucky. But I think the far outside post and the fact that this horse has a lot of speed. Now, that the part of that you go, well, that's good. He can use its speed, get out in front, cross and clear a lot of horses. You won't get stuck wide. It's true. Problem is there's like 6 other horses in this race that have a lot of early speed. I have a feeling this is not going to look like any turf race in New York. This is going to look like a turf race in Kentucky where they're going fast fractions up front. And so this is where I think you might see a horse coming from the back of the field or middle of the pack because that front end speed is going to get worn out. Bling at 6-1 is a horse I kind of like a little bit for Victoria Oliver and Rafael Bariano. Good pedigree, should like the distance. Good tactical speed, doesn't need the lead, but should sit just off of it. I actually think the horse on the far inside, the Whit Beckman horse, jockeyed by Jose Ortiz, Sabalenka, I like that horse at 10-1 quite a bit. Going to get a ground saving trip. Doesn't, has enough speed to sit maybe mid-pack, but really has shown the ability to come from off the pace. I think is going to have something to close into. I think the Jessamine Stakes look for a closer. Last year, remember, California Angel won this race. I'd expect a deep closer in this race because of all the front end speed that is out there. Well, let's go to the other big race on Friday at Keeneland, and that's the Darley Alcibiades. And this is a really just a loaded field. And the favorite, Fun and Feisty, the Ken McPeak horse, won the Pocahontas. I'm a little worried about this because that horse came from the clouds that day to win the Pocahontas. There's not nearly as much speed, I think, front end in this race, drawing a little further outside as well in the 9 hole. So I'm a little skeptical of Fun and Feisty. I'm not sure that this is going to be the race that sets up well for her. But the horse I really like in this spot is Raging Sea, the Chad Brown horse that you're going to get 6-1 in the morning line for. Should have really good pace, should sit perfect placement. This horse should sit kind of in a stalking position. I'd expect to see this horse sitting third or fourth going into the turn. Really turned out a beautiful maiden effort. Raging Sea at 6-1 is a horse I like a lot. Kaling on the outside, another horse I like quite a bit. Ran well last time out, ran second actually at the Hopeful. So there's a couple of horses I like here quite a bit. But yeah, Kaling is another one that I like. But Raging Sea is probably my top pick in this particular race. But as I mentioned earlier, in these large field races with 2-year-olds in particular, it's really about who's going to get the best trip. And I think Raging Sea is going to get a really good trip. And so those are the sorts of things that you have to ask yourself. Some people trust certain jockeys more than others. Some people trust certain trainers more than others. All understandable angles. I would really look at the trip here. Who do you think, to remove all the names, who's going to get the best trip from this group? I trust Jose Ortiz to get Raging Sea in the right position. There are a couple of other horses that I like here. I do like the Grand Motion horse quite a bit with Irad Ortiz Jr. Aboard. So there's some other nice horses here to take a look at, but definitely like Raging Sea at 6-1. Well, let's shift to Saturday in the Thoroughbred Club of America. And this is, again, at Keeneland, and this is a qualifier for the filly and mare sprint. It's a really intriguing race, and I feel like there's a potential for a lot of prices. One of the things I will say is this field is filled with winners. This field is filled with horses that know how to win regularly, and not just win regularly. None of these horses run poorly ever. I mean, these horses, you go through and look at their running lines, everybody's finishing in the money all the time in this race. So this is a really, really even race. I feel like could go a lot of different ways. You know, Caribbean Caper, this is a horse that hadn't lost, then goes on almost a year-long layoff, comes back, runs at Colonial last time out, finishes fourth. Now you go, on one hand, you go, well, did this horse just need a break? And did need to break one in, needed one off the bench. Now we're going to go back to its winning ways. Or is that year-long layoff, does maybe something come out of the horse after that? Is this horse going to be the same after that type of a layoff? Club Car, this is a horse that just is reliable as it gets. 23 for 28 in the money. Hello. 23 for 28 in the money. The problem is 13 for 28 finishing second. This horse that does not win very often, but runs like hell very, very often. You got Sconson, who's a really nice horse. Liberty MD, my initials. Of course, I have to like that horse. But I do think Happy Soul and Joyful Cadence on the far outside, those are going to be some tough horses to get past. I like both of them quite a bit. If they can, if they can find the trip, I think they both are a very promising horses in this particular race. Always want to look at Wesley Ward sprinting horses. Obviously not on turf this time, but a very, very good horse and Happy Soul. So the Claiborne Breeders' Futurity, another massive field. And this is, of course, a qualifier for the Fanduel Juvenile. And let's talk about this race. Loggins, Brad Cox horse, might be an absolute monster. This might be the next big Brad Cox horse. A Ghost Sapper cost $460,000 at sale. Ran a 90 buyers first time out. I mean, this horse might be really, really good. And that was about as impressive of a first-time effort as we're going to see. There's one other horse that ran a better first-time effort, which we'll talk about in another race. But Loggins, really, really good horse. You look at Instant Coffee, another Cox horse who ran a really big buyer's figure first time out. More of a grinder, is a Bolt Doro progeny. Those Bolt Doros have been running well this year. So you got to like that from Instant Coffee. By the way, Instant Coffee beat, I can't make this up, Instant Coffee beat a horse named Juan Valdez last time out. Anybody who was alive in the 1980s understands that joke, because Juan Valdez was like that's like the coffee icon for all these commercials, and for Colombian coffee. And so it was just very funny that Instant Coffee and Juan Valdez ended up in the same field. Bourbon Bash, the D. Wayne Lucas horse. I look for this horse to bounce back after a bad hopeful effort. That was a race again, sloppy conditions, sealed track. That horse had looked really good leading up to that race. D. Wayne's barn has been, improving over the last year or two. And so you've been seeing better quality in there. I think this is another really strong D. Wayne entry that we have there. Forte is probably your morning line favorite. The Todd Pletcher horse, jockeyed by Irad Ortiz. This horse ran a monster at the Hopeful. The problem is the horse made a huge jump from its second to third efforts to the Hopeful. The issue is he a product of a sealed track? This is the same discussion we were having about the horse We the People before the Belmont, right? We were talking about We the People at the Belmont. Was We the People a product of a sealed track? I think you can ask the same question about Forte, who ran third at the Sanford and then comes back and just crushes and runs a huge speed figure in sealed conditions at the Hopeful. Now, I think Forte's a really good horse and has attracted a lot of money early throughout his career. So there's clearly something there. I think Todd's got a really good horse, but you just can't be loyal to those speed figures, I think, because they're going to come with some qualifications in this particular race. Bob Baffert sends a horse to Kentucky in Newgate. I think this probably speaks more to the fact that he's got some better horses running this weekend out in California, I think. But Newgate you can't discount this horse. He ran poorly at the Belmar Futurity and regressed. This is a horse that also cost $850,000 at sale. Now, listen, price tags don't lead to wins necessarily, but they can be a damn good indicator of pedigree and the balance of a horse and the look of a horse. And early on, when these horses only have 2 or 3 races under their belt, price tags do matter when handicapping, and particularly, and not just handicapping, but all looking at betting and looking ahead at going, who's going to take money? Because that's the thing, is a lot of times sales prices can be kind of a shorthand for a lot of people. And so people are going to look at that $850,000 price tag and they're going to bet on Newgate, despite the fact this horse did not run the best at the Del Mar Futurity. If you're into pedigree, Red Route 1, the Asmussen horse, is a gun runner. Horse is trying dirt for the first time, so there's a little bit of a curveball there. I'm not sure what you're going to get out of this. The other horse I'll say that I'm interested in here is Lost Ark, which is the other Todd Pletcher horse. Won a non-graded stakes race last time out by 7 lengths. You can't discount that. And it gets Flavia on a board, which I like. So really strong field for this Breeder Cup Futurity. Can't wait to watch this on Saturday. Well, let's go to the Turf Mile, and this might be my favorite, obviously, for the Fanduel Mile. This might be my favorite field because it's got one of my favorite horses running today, which is Santon. Santon is a horse I've loved for the last year, ever since he ran really big in the Hollywood Derby and last year out at Santa Anita. And he's just a horse I just absolutely love. But here's the thing. Santon has really shown out, proven a lot, 2-time grade 1 winner. Here's the thing, though. I need for Santon to prove that he's not a product of the Churchill Downs turf, because those 2 Group 1s were on the Churchill grade 1s were on the Churchill Downs turf, which is, like people have said, like running on cement that's spray painted green. This is a real turf course. How is Santon going to do in this particular race? He's got his work cut out for him. Smooth like straight, incredibly consistent horse. Probably won't win, but has lost its last 7 races by a combined 5 lengths. Hello. This is a horse that finishes second and third all the time, consistently runs 100 plus buyer figures, as consistent as it gets. Order of Australia, the Aidan O'Brien horse coming over from overseas. This is a horse I would take very seriously. This is a horse that has faced Baid, has faced Inspiral. Do not be deceived by placement of finish in some of those races. He has been running against monsters out there over in England. And so Order of Australia is absolutely a horse you have to take seriously. Mason, on the other hand, the Chad Brown horse, this is a horse that has a lot of hype, has won twice since coming over to North America. I don't know. I've just never been overwhelmed by Mason, though. And maybe it was just too much promise and people's expectations were too high. Perfectly good horse. Like I said, 2 wins in 4 tries, has never finished out of the money in North America. But still, I feel like this horse hasn't shown that he can win this type of a race. And I have a feeling this horse is going to attract some money. So I just don't love that. Ivar for Palo Lobo ran really well at the Woodbine Mile behind the big Charlie Appleby horse. So I'd expect Ivar to run well. Casa Creed, love Casa Creed. Not sure he gets the trip that he gets in the 4-star Dave last time out, but Casa's a great horse. I feel like Annapolis, pumpkin, the carriage is going to turn into a pumpkin a little bit. Annapolis is a horse that I'm kind of out on. I just don't think is as good as some of the finishes have indicated. And I think this field is going to maybe make Annapolis look pretty pedestrian. And so, he ran against a super small field last time out. I think a 4-horse field up at Saratoga. And it was, it was him and not a lot else. And, so I just think that Annapolis is a horse that might attract a little too much money and may not be quite good enough in that space. Well, let's shift from Kentucky out to the West Coast and sunny Southern California. 3 win-in-your-in races out at Santa Anita this weekend, including the Rodeo Drive, which is, of course, a qualifier for the Maker's Mark Filly and Mare Turf. And here, even though we're moving out west, I think you got to look at 2 East Coast / Midwest horses, and that is Fluffy Socks for Chad Brown. Very interesting move. Chad does not move his turf horses out west very often, but it feels like he wants to get Fluffy Socks a win, honestly, and I feel like this is a good spot for him because if Fluffy Socks runs anywhere like he has the last few times out, this one is over before it starts. I typically like East Coast turf horses going west. I don't like it the other way around a lot of times. But this is a very, very good horse who's been running extremely well, just hasn't been able to get the win, has been running up against really strong competition on the East Coast. So like for Fluffy Socks to break through here, likely is the morning line favorite. Looking at distance, I think, is important in this race. A lot of these horses are very good horses, but they don't love this 1.25 miles in a lot of instances. Family Way, a Brendan Walsh horse, 5 for 7 in the money at this distance, only 1 win. So that's a horse I'd probably want to use underneath more with Mike Smith aboard, but I do like that horse. Going to Vegas, I feel like is Fluffy Socks' biggest challenge. There's a horse that's 4 for 4 in the money at 1.25 miles, 2 for 4 winning at that distance. I still think Fluffy Socks gets it, but going to Vegas is going to be the biggest West Coast challenge to him in this particular race. So let's move to the juvenile races to finish out things at Santa Anita. And the first one is the Chandelier Stakes, which is, of course, a qualifier for the NetJet Juvenile Phillies. The horse to look for here, a few of them, but Justique. This is a very, very interesting horse. This horse generated a lot of controversy on social media after her maiden effort because people thought by the eye test, it looked like a monster effort, but turned back with a very slow speed figure, only a 72. Now, one of the things I've said before is when it comes to 2-year-olds, especially 2-year-old maiden races, 2-year-old, second, third, first, second starts, I tend to really not look at speed figures all that often. Speed figures for 2-year-olds are notoriously unreliable and deviate significantly. And even the people making buyers speed figures will tell you that because they don't know how good the rest of the field is. They don't know how the rest of the division is playing necessarily. So these speed figures, they're not just purely objective in that regard. And so it's important to keep that in mind. So Justique was a horse that ran really well first time out, is now coming back after a little bit of a layoff. Will be interesting to see if she can back up that first time effort. And Tell Me No Lies. This is the horse from Peter Miller, jockeyed by Ramon Vasquez, won the Del Mar Futurity last time out. That said, speed figure-wise regressed a little bit. Now, and you know what I just said about not trusting speed figures. That said, I feel like this is a horse that might be due for an upset because it had a lot of stiff competition that day, and a lot of it's coming back. Horse like Home Cooking, for instance, the Bob Baffert horse. This is a horse that seems prone for a bounce-back effort after finishing second at that Del Mar Futurity. Also really like Ice Dancing, the Richard Mandela horse. Always like Umberto Rispoli, a fellow Paisan aboard. But Ice Dancing, that's a horse that should love the added distance of 1.16 miles, stretching out from 7 furlongs to this 1.16 mile distance. But going to be an interesting race for sure. And now let's finish up with the final race for the win in your ends this weekend, which is, of course, the American Pharoah Stakes, a mile and a 16th on dirt. This is for the boys in the Fanduel Juvenile. And this one might be as simple as, if you're playing this at home, just single Cave Rock. This is a horse that is a freak, it appears. Just another Baffert horse that is just stunning. Ran huge speed figures the first 2 times out. 101 speed figure first time out. Hello. You don't see that every day of the week. And 98 the next time out. Progeny, son of Arrogate, 2 wins by a combined 11 lengths. Not a lot else you can say. I mean, this feels like a Cave Rock and everybody else. Gandolfini's a nice horse on the inside. And Hijazi had a huge jump in speed figures last time out. I would be very cautious with that horse, though. That horse is going to be stretching out from 5.5 furlongs to a mile and a 16th. The pedigree's there, but still, that's a big stretch out. It's not as if this horse is going from 7 to a mile and a 16th. This horse is going from 5.5 to a mile and a 16th. So Cave Rock could turn in the best effort this weekend. I think I'm definitely going to be tuning into the American Pharoah Stakes to see that. I always love these juveniles. And we'll see. Hopefully this year's juveniles comes back a little bit stronger than last year's Breeders' Cup juvenile field that did not produce much else in terms of the 3-year-old class for this year. So those are the Breeders' Cup Win Your In races for this weekend. I tried to get through those as quickly as possible. I know we're running a little long on this episode, but I do want to leave you with a little bit of Breeders' Cup news. First off, the big news. Life is Good. After a very so-so Woodward, where I think Irad Ortiz Jr. put the horse to sleep in the backside, Life is Good turns out is going to be headed towards the Breeders' Cup Classic. I hear some people saying, well, I'll believe it when I see it. But all indications from Todd Pletcher, from the ownership group, is they are pointing Life is Good to the Breeders' Cup Classic. That is great. We're excited to see that. Hopefully Irad does not try to strangle a 48-second opening half out of that horse. But he probably will. Lieutenant Dan, the great West Coast turf horse, is out of the turf sprint. Reason being, there's a little bit of an injury concern there. No specific injury was mentioned, but just seemed like the horse was just training off. They've decided to rest this horse. We'll come back for another campaign next year. The Breeders' Cup Distaff, we've not talked about the Distaff recently because we've not had a lot of winner in races in that division because most of them took place earlier in the year or in the summer before I started doing this show. But all the big names are headed towards the Distaff. Malathaat, Clairiere, Latruska, Search Results, Nest, Society, the winner of the Cotillion last time out. All of them are looking and headed in that direction. Clairiere appears to have had a tongue issue last time out. Steve Asmussen just told DRF that this past week. Said Clairiere had scraped her tongue very badly in the gate right before her last race. That could have explained why Clairiere ran so poorly that time. She's already been shipped to Keeneland, though. She's going to be ready to roll. That said, there are a couple of horses that are going to not make it to the Distaff. She Dares the Devil is out. Desert Dawn is likely out. La Validad, who's a horse that qualified in South America, is out. And then Midnight Memories is also likely out. So a few horses are out, but the biggest names, Malathaat, Clairiere, Latruska, Search Results, Nest, and Society, are all in on that Distaff. That Distaff division has turned to one of the strongest that we have in North America. So fallout from the ARC, I wanted to give you just kind of a rundown here because there's going to be a lot of lines through these horses, I have a feeling. Alpinista is very uncommitted at this point for coming over. If I had to guess, I would lean towards a heavy no there. Certainly did not seem that that's where they were headed. Sir Mark Prescott mentioned several races before he mentioned the Breeders' Cup as a possible next landing spot for Alpinista. So the winner of the ARC and the Great Bear likely not coming over to Keeneland. Luxembourg, as I mentioned, hurt himself in that ARC race, will not be racing and will obviously not be coming over. That is certainly a blow. Placé du Carrousel is a maybe from the trainer. So we'll see. It sounds like a no for that horse, which is discouraging that a 41-1 long shot doesn't even want to come over to the Breeders' Cup. That said, Above the Curve, which finished third place in that race, that horse may come over, actually. It's looking like that horse is going to come over. That's a Joseph O'Brien horse, and that's a very important name, Aiden's son, who has been setting up shop in Saratoga. I think you're going to start seeing a lot more Joseph O'Brien horses coming over, and that's, thank God, we need some European horses coming over here. Blue Rose Sen is weighing options if they want to run again this year. That's kind of sad. I really like that horse, really like the effort I saw, but not holding my breath there. Belbeck is pointed towards a Group 1 at Doncaster next time out, so he's out from the Breeders' Cup. And the Platinum Queen, like I said, unfortunately, she's not able to qualify for the turf sprint. Does seem like she will likely come for the juvenile turf sprint. Why are all these Europeans just not coming over? Honestly, because the Breeders' Cup just isn't a big deal for them. Like it's not going to, winning the Breeders' Cup is not going to enhance their pedigree legacy, is not going to enhance their resume. They're going to run in the Group 1s over there. They have just as much money. They have, they have all these different types of races. They don't have to put the strain on the horse flying it overseas, etc. And so why would they? And they know they're facing the best competition where they are. Why would they come over here and face like a half step down? Now, if they all come over, sure. But I mean, it's a little bit of like, well, what do you expect? Like, of course, they're not going to come over to do that. It's a little bit of like, a horse that runs, I don't know, I'm not going to try to take any shots at different tracks, but a horse that runs at Keeneland isn't just going to go, well, let's run at Charlestown next time out. Like, that's probably not going to happen. Like, you're not going to go to a smaller track with lesser competition. And that's kind of the way that a lot of Europeans, quite frankly, feel about the Breeders' Cup, is it's a little bit of an afterthought. And they don't point their horses towards the Breeders' Cup the way North American trainers do. And so the Arc was what a lot of them were pointing their horses to. Like this past weekend was what they were pointing their horses to, not a month from now and a month and a half from now. So that's why. But I wanted to end this episode on good news, and that is everyone's favorite Iowan horse, Tyler's Tribe. Now, there's a group of us, a group of friends that I have. Affectionately, we refer to ourselves as the East Coast horse players. Shout out Len, shout out Mark, shout out Greg. Great guys. And I got to give credit to Len. He was on this horse, Tyler's Tribe, from the very beginning. Tyler's Tribe, if you don't know this horse, is a 2-year-old monster of a horse that runs at Prairie Meadows in Iowa. This is a horse that runs only at about 5.5 to 6 furlongs and has just been crushing competition and winning by like 12 lengths in these sprints. And he is 5 for 5 winning. He's never been challenged. He's just a great story because, but he has nice pedigree. Sharp Azteca background, which Sharp Azteca has been a nice first crop sire. So I really like these Sharp Aztecas, not just Tyler's Tribe. He's produced quite a few good ones. But Tyler's Tribe is just a monster of a horse. And if you've not seen his races, Google him, YouTube him, look him up. But I think he symbolizes everything I'm excited about because he's just this huge, beautiful 2-year-old running in anonymity to some extent in Iowa. And here he could go and take on the biggest horses in the world. It's a little bit of an underdog story, and I'm rooting for him. I'm really, really rooting for him. There was some talk that the ownership group might point him towards the juvenile turf sprint because there is not a dirt sprint for juveniles, and Sharp Aztecas have done okay on the turf. Word out now is that he may actually be pointed towards the juvenile, which I'm not sure about. That's might be a distance too far for him, although Sharp Aztecas have stretched out okay, but he's never run anything over 6 furlongs. But Tyler's Tribe, this is the horse that I'm like so excited about because he's just been crushing people, and it's a little bit like the movie The Natural, like this Robert Redford, this kind of Midwestern kind of guy who's just got it and finally gets a shot in the bigs and legendary. And so Tyler's Tribe kind of feels the same story. This little horse, or he's not little, he's actually a really big horse, but this horse at this little track in Iowa who's going to try to take on the big boys at the Breeders' Cup. And I'm rooting for him. I'm rooting for Tyler's Tribe. So this was a long episode because there were a hell of a lot of races to get through this week. And so I do apologize for that, but I tried to do it as quickly as I could. That said, make sure to like and subscribe to Trust the Profits for all of our Breeders' Cup countdowns, all of our Breeders' Cup episodes, all of the great stuff we have, Colin and Vinny doubling down, all these top 10, top 5 lists we got coming out, all of the great advanced stuff that we do. So make sure to like and subscribe to Trust the Profits YouTube. Make sure to follow me on Twitter at the handle @FailedToMenace. And until next time, friends, remember that it's now post time.